Hi, in this session, we're going to be talking about animation. When we talk about animation, we talk about frame rate. What does frame rate means? And frame rate differs between one country and another. We talk about PAL, we talk about NTSC, and we talk about film. What exactly are these? I'm just going to explain them in a very simple way, just to get a knowledge of where those numbers come from and why they are different from one area to another, from one country to another. I'm just gonna go in here and I'm gonna talk about this in a small table. First of all, the area is divided into three different categories. We have PAL, we have NTSC, and we have film. And now we're talking about animation. Later on, we're going to talk about rendering. We also have a different aspect of that. So first of all, what does NTSC and PAL means and where they stand for? First, NTSC stands for National Television Standard Committee, and PAL stands for Phase Alternating Line. NTSC is a standard broadcast format in the United States, in Japan, in Philippines, and some other countries. And mainly PAL is standard broadcast in Europe, Australia, and a big part of Asia. So this is basically the distribution of these zones. They are like kind of zones. So if I have a PAL DVD, for example, and I want to plug it in an NTSC format, it doesn't work. So if I have a PAL from Europe and I go to United States, it doesn't work, and vice versa. So what are these? So first of all, we talk about frame rate. Frame rate is basically how many frames you can see in 1 second. Okay, so usually a long time ago when they used to do animation by hand, by drawing, they used to have some kind of feeder which will load these papers, the drawings, in a format which is 25 frames or 25 paper per second or 30 papers per second. So these are the frames. The frames are basically the paper, each individual paper and drawing. So if I'm moving the box from point A to point B, okay, from here to here, so it's going to be the first paper, it's going to be here, and then it's going to be here, and it's going to be here, and then it will reach the endpoint. So these are the frames. Now we have format and different formats. I'm not going to go like really so details in that, but we just know depending where you are at, so you know which format you're going to work with. If you live in the PAL area or NTSC area, or in maybe different areas, but usually this is the main. So PAL, they work in 25 FPS. Okay, FPS means frames per second. So we have 25 frames per second in the PAL format. If you're working in an NTSC format, it has 30 FPS, which is 30 frames per second. And if you want to work with the film industry, usually they work with 24 FPS, and that would be the film work. That's perfect. So now if I'm working with a PAL country and I want to submit my work to an NTSC country on a DVD, it won't work because 25 frames per second and this is 30 frames per second or vice versa. So there is 5 frames of difference. So the animation is going to be faster or slower on the long run. So this is basically a preview. So you know what to choose when you start working with animation, because we need to decide if it's going to be 25, 30 frames, or maybe 24 frames later on. So I'm just going to go jump into Max, and I'm going to maximize my viewport, and that's it. So I'm just going to draw a box. Okay, I have a box in here. This is my model, and just modeled it and just create maybe my materials, my lighting, whatever, and I want to animate. I can do animation just after modeling. I can do animation later on. It doesn't matter. What matters is before I start animation, I have to decide my formats. So I have to go in here to the time configuration. I can click on the time configuration icon, or I can right click on the play button. So both of them will open the time configuration. My frame rate, this is what I care about. By default, it's NTSC. If you are NTSC, so you work 30 frames per second, that's perfect. Just leave it as NTSC. But if you are PAL, in the area of PAL, so just make sure you set this as PAL. That's perfect. In my case, I'm just going to set this to PAL because I live in a country that's PAL oriented. Perfect. So as I said, NTSC is for the US, PAL is for Europe and Asia. So I'm just going to set this for example, in my case, as PAL. Now, the second thing I care about in this is my animation tab. So you have my start time and my end time. If I'm working in 25 frames per second, which is PAL, my start time is 0, my end time is how many frames I need to finish my animation. For example, in my case, I'm just going to work with 4 seconds. 4 seconds, it means 4 times 25, which means 100. So my end time should be 100. So this is an animation timeline between 0 and 100, which is a 4-second animation. If I want to have maybe 30 seconds, so I'm going to multiply 30 by 25, it's going to be 750. And 750 frames, that's going to be my start and end time. When I change this, my timeline in here will change. So I'm just going to go in here and put 100 in my case, and that's it. Now, this is the most important thing. Other than that, I have my playback, which is not really important and not used often, but I'm just going to go through it. You have the real time checked, okay, which means when I play my time, it will play real time. So if I go with the chronometer and I play my animation, it should finish at the same exact time. Even if it has to skip frames or jump or do whatever it wants, it has to go real time. Active time viewport only. By default, if I have my 4 views open and I play animation, one of those viewport will play the one that's selected and not the 4 of them. So if you uncheck this, 4 of them will play. This would really help in 2 options. First of all, not to have a chaos, like everything is going to be animated, especially if you have a complex animation. And the second thing, it will help your graphic card to go easy on it. So instead of playing on the four views, you play only on one, and that will be like clear and better. The third option is loop. When you play your timeline, when it goes to the end, it will loop again and again and again. If you turn this off, it will play it and will stop at the end of the frames. The speed, by default, it's 1x. If you want it to be 2 times or 4 times or half or quarter, you can just play on that. This is just for the playback. Just for the playback. It doesn't affect the animation overall or the render overall. It's just the playback if you want to see it slow motion or you want to see it a bit fast. That's basically it. I'm done with that. I'm just going to say OK. And now I have from 0 to 100 frames, but now I'm working with PAL, not NTSC, in my case. Now, if I want to animate any object, all I need to do is basically I want to decide where my objects need to start and where it has to end. So in my case, I want to have this box to start over here. So I'm going to go to the move tool, make sure where I want to put it. And then I'm going to turn on my auto key to start recording. As you can see, everything goes red. So now I'm recording session. So everything I'm going to do is going to be recorded. But it's different than real-time video recording. It's basically working by frames. So on each frame, where I want the object to be. In my case, on the 0 frame, which is the starting position, I want it to be here. And maybe by 100 frames, at the end of the animation, after 4 seconds, where I want it to be. So I can just move it here, or move it down, move it here, move it here. It will not record my animation in here, but it will record just my end point. So this is my release position. So now I have an animation from this point to this point, as you can see on the timeline. So I can just go here and play, and you can see I have an animation of 4 seconds moving from this point to this point. Shortcut for play is basically the question mark on the keyboard next to the shift. So I'm just gonna press play, and this object is moving from this point to this point. What exactly is happening? If I'm gonna select this object and go to my timeline, you can see I have a red dot here and another red dot here. What does that mean? This red dot is called a key. A key is kind of a snapshot, let's say, that has information. In my case, it is red. It means in max, it means it have information on the move tool, which is obvious. I'm moving this object. So it has the coordinates of this object at this exact moment of time, which is the frame 0. The coordinates of this object is where it stands here. Why? This key have the coordinates on the move tool where x, y, z of this object at this moment of time, which is frame 100, which is here. By default, starting from here, ending by there, the 3D Max will do the animation in between. So it's going to move this object from this point to this point automatically. So as you can see, it is moved automatically. That's basically animation. So this is how we work with animation, and definitely we can make it more complicated by working with more keys and so on. We're going to go through them. So the basics is basically make sure where the object is on a specific time, so I can record the position of that, and then at another specific time where it's going to be and record the position of that. And then the animation will be between this point and this point, this position and the other position. Great. Now, what if I want to play around with this animation? I want to make it faster, for example. By default, the animation is between 1 or frame 0 and frame 100, which is 4 seconds. If I want the animation to go faster, it means this box should move from this point to this point faster, means less than 4 seconds. What we should do, technically, we can play around with the keys. So if I select this key and make it move faster, for example, 75, and maybe this key, make it move faster till 25. Now, the duration of this animation is less than 100 now. It's basically 50 frames. So it's technically double the speed. So now if I play, you can see that the box, there's no key in here, so nothing's going to happen in here until this frame 25. Now frame 25 is going to be moving from this coordinates to this coordinates in 2 seconds, and then it's going to pause because I have nothing over there till here. So if I play now, it's going to pause, move faster, and then pause. Okay, so it's going to be moving the same amount of distance in less time. So it's going to be faster. That's perfect. So now I can just move around my keys to make them faster, maybe faster. So it's going to move in 10 frames, less than a second, like this, and then we're going to pause it. Perfect. So now I can make my animation faster or slower by moving the keys away from each other or towards each other. If I make them closer to each other, the animation is going to be faster. And if I make the keys away from each other, the animation is going to be slower. That's perfect. So now I'm just going to move this back to 0. And I'm going to move this back to maybe 25. So I'm just going to move this in 1 second because I have 25 frames per second. So that's going to be 1 second. Perfect. So 1 second in here. Done. Now, what if I want this object to move more in this remaining time? All I need to do, just move this timeline, let's say 50, let's say after 1 second, I'm just going to move this box diagonally, maybe here. As you can see, I have saved key because my auto key is still on. So now I have 3 keys. 1, position 2. Okay, so from 0 to 25, 25 to 50. What if I want more? So I'm going to go 75. I'm going to move this back here. Perfect. And now it's going to pause. Now, if I'm going to move this back to its place, I can just hold this and move it back to its place. If I'm going to play, as you can see, it's going to be playing, and you will see that there's a small jump. Okay? I just made it an exaggerated movement, definitely, so you can see it. So I just move it a bit further in here. Okay, so as you can see, there's a small difference between the last frame and the first frame. What if I want this last frame to be exactly in the same position? No problem. All I need to do, I can just delete this, or I can replace it. In my case, I'm just going to hold 0 frame, which is this key over here, which is this position of XYZ, and I'm going to shift and drag it. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to place it on the 100. I can place it over the other key, so I will replace it, or in my case, I just deleted it, so I'm just going to replace it. Now, if I play, it's going to be just seamless loop, as you can see. Okay, so nothing is going to be jumping because this frame on position is exactly the same position as this frame. So 0 and 100 are exactly the same, so that's why it's going to be a continuous loop. Perfect. So now I can just add more keys and add details. For example, I want this object to move from this point to this point, but I want it to move maybe something like in kind of the middle, just to move maybe outward. So now I have another key, so it's going to do like an arc. And now maybe I wanted to do this kind of maybe also arc in here, and in here I wanted to go downward, and in this case I wanted to go something like that. So I just added keys in between, so now it has some kind of wobbly movement. So it's not gonna move straight, it's just moving kind of curves, such arcs. As you can see, it's an arc in here, it's an arc in here, it's an arc in here, and it's an arc in here. Okay, so I can just, I'm adding more details to this animation, and I can move on X and Y and Z. That's perfect. This is applicable on all the other animation because I can just animate the object on lot of things. I can move it on the XYZ, so I can have keys on the move. I can have keys on the rotate, on the scale, on the material, and something called objects or any material, any modifier or any setup parameters or anything that we can play around with its values. I can just create animation for that, which is amazing. I'm just gonna go through this one by one. Let's say I'm done with this animation. I don't want it. I'm just gonna delete it. I'm gonna delete all the keys. All the keys. I'm just gonna place my object in here. And what if I want to animate this object on the rotation? So I'm just gonna go rotation. And now I'm gonna have auto key still on. I'm gonna rotate this object, let's say 100 or 360 degrees, let's say 360 degrees. And then I'm gonna rotate it 360 degrees anti-clockwise. Now I have an animation on the rotation. Play, clockwise, anti-clockwise. I did 3 keys. Select the object, you can see the keys on the object. So I have a key on 50 and then a key on 100. Okay, great. What's the difference? The difference is basically the color of the key. That's the only difference between the keys. And what we are doing is basically rotation instead of movement. So now I have a key on 0, on a key on 50 and a key on 100. They are green. Green, it means rotation and not movement. Move, it has the red color. Rotation, it has the green color. So now I can rotate this object as I wish and animate it. So in my case, I just did a simple animation, and I can make this this key closer to each other. For example, I'm just gonna make them 10 frames difference, so 40 to 50, 50 to 60. So it's going to be pause and then very quick rotation, then pause. So as I've said, when you get the keys closer to each other, they're going to be faster. When you get them away from each other, they're going to be slower. And I will do the same thing for scale. If I'm gonna go for this object, for example, and I just decided to delete all my keys. So make sure to turn off auto key. And I'm gonna place my object in here. I'm gonna scale it a bit. Okay, now I'm gonna turn on key. So now what I want this object to be scaling. So I'm gonna go scale and I'm gonna go squash. And I'm gonna squash this on Z at frame 50. As you can see, I have a key in here, and then maybe squash it back like this on frame 100. Now, if I play, you can see I'm squashing down, pushing up, and then it's repeating. As you can see, the last frame is not exactly the same frame as the first. What I'm going to do, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to copy the last frame, which is stretched, and place it in here. So it will start in stretching position. So key 1, key 2, key 3. As you can see, the colors are blue, which represents scale. If I want to have them faster, I can just make them closer and closer. For example, something like that. And now I can have something stretched. If I want to have this animation maybe repetitive, I can just copy them. So I can just move these keys again and again by clicking Shift and drag. Okay, so that's basically it. So I'm just gonna play it now. So it's going to be stretching and squashing on and on and on. Okay, so as you can see, the move position for animation is the keys are red, the rotation is green, the scale is blue. So RGB, move, rotate, and scale. So that's basically how we can animate any object on the move, rotate, and scale, which are the transform transform things. That's perfect. So now I just have animated this object on the move and rotate and scale, and maybe this is what I want to start with.